Hi everyone. Hopefully you can hear me just fine. Hopefully I'm coming through good. Oh, I'm sounding fine over here. Cool. Forgot that I had myself unmuted. Or playing in my ear. What you guys will be hearing for a soundtrack is nothing but public domain music that is cool and jazzy. While I'm over here listening to the Ace Combat 5 soundtrack because that game is amazing. I played it again last night, and my god, I love that game. And you know what's funny? Without even intentionally doing it, that game definitely influenced the Godzilla Saga a lot, and the timing was right. Because when I first played that, I was in high school, and high school was when I was developing a lot of the quote-unquote universe of the Godzilla Saga, and that is one reason. It definitely kind of showed up. It surprised me. Wonderful game. Definitely recommend it. Hi, Justin. Hi, Godzilla Kiru. Once again, Kiru is my favorite Mechagodzilla, by the way. Not necessarily design-wise, but in terms of character. Will always be my favorite. So yeah, guess what? We're talking about the Godzilla Saga here today. Something that I haven't talked about really in a very, very long time. And one of the reasons why I haven't talked about it in a very, very, very long time is because I have indeed been working on it a lot. And I sort of went dark on it for quite a while. And well, let's just say that 2 out of the 4 books are completely done. They have been edited, they have been written, they are completely done. In the other 2 books that still need to be completed, because there's 4 books in total, the other 2 books are close to being done. They're on their second to final draft. And the reason why I'm bringing that up in particular is because, well, there was a lot of there's a beta reader that I genuinely trust. I forgot to hit start recording. This beta reader I genuinely trusted, and one thing that he complained about quite a bit, with particularly the last 3 books in the series, was that I was doing a lot of telling, not showing, which goes into the sort of historian mindset in me. I mean, one of the things that I said from the get-go was I was writing these books kind of like a history novel, like it was historical fiction, and I've kind of gone away from that because of his genuine criticisms. One of the criticisms that he gave was you were explaining a lot about this universe, you weren't showing this universe. And that's one reason why I'm going back, and particularly those 2 novels, they've been kicking my butt. They've been kicking my butt because those were the 2 most talkiest of the books, and they are definitely the ones that the most happens in them. One sets up this universe, and the other one is the conclusion of said universe. So basically how I look at it in general is these books are basically World War I and World War II, and that being said, so essentially you've got the 4 books. You have Godzilla and King Kong, and then you go into the next 3 books. The next 3 books are essentially a trilogy. You have Godzilla vs. Biollante, Godzilla vs. Titanosaurus, you can actually see the poster behind me, and then finally Godzilla the Immortal, which are the trilogy that follow. There are different characters in the trilogy that follows, but essentially what the first book does, Godzilla and King Kong, what that does is, without that book or that story being told, setting up this gargantuan universe, setting up everything that's been going on, decisions that happen in the next 3 books would make little sense. There are people who rise to power within the next 3 books of the series who make certain decisions that they do throughout their career because of the events that they saw back in the events of 2029, which 2029 is the year that Godzilla and King Kong takes place in. And then I can't quite remember off the top of my head when the first. Let me pull up the timeline here. Just give me one moment, because I built an entire timeline that was extremely detailed. And of course, it doesn't want to pop up right away, so I gotta dig for it. Here it is. Yeah, so the first book, Godzilla and King Kong, that takes place during 2029, and the next book takes place in 2048. So again, there's quite a big leap in time in between the first and second book, and I do that very deliberately. I did that, well, quite frankly, because I pull a lot from history. I think history is dramatic enough that I can pull a lot from it, and that is one reason why I did that. So basically, look at the first book as World War I, and then the series that follows as the crazy and chaotic World War II. Because the trilogy that follows actually takes place over the course of a little over a decade. It starts in 2048 and it ends in 2065. 2065 is the year that the last book takes place in. And it's quite enjoyable to be able to build my own universe in that way. Same thing that I also find a little funny is that I was sort of looking at my notes here, and I was looking at the vastness of the time gaps, particularly between books 2 and 3. And I specifically did that for a big reason. I did that because if I ever wanted to go back and flesh out the universe even more, not necessarily write a book as big or as detailed as the Godzilla Saga itself, but if I wanted to write some supplementary material for it, I left room open for that. Because there's a lot of stuff that happens between Godzilla vs. Titanosaurus and Godzilla the Immortal. And so essentially what I did was look at my timeline, flesh it out, do all that jazz, and then I picked the most dramatic points within the story and chose to write the books about those most dramatic periods of time. And again, that's very much so approaching it on a historical sense. And again, a lot of inspiration came from doing a lot of research on particularly World War I, because World War I isn't really taught in school very much. World War I is one of those sort of topics that gets skipped quite a bit and glanced over, because there's not the characters of World War I. The characters of World War I, we don't really know who Philippe Pétain was. We don't really know who Joffre was of the French High Command. We don't really know who General Haig was. Unfortunately, we don't really know who General Pershing was here in the United States. However, we know who General Patton is. We know who Field Marshal Rommel is. We know who Field Marshal von Rundstedt is in his, we know who Heinz Guderian is. We know who General Yamashita is. Those are characters that, there are tons and tons and tons of supplementary material to read about them. And I started getting obsessed with this idea, especially after reading this 11-part book series. It was an alternate history thing. I'll probably get to that a little later. But why those characters became who they are. And the more I started researching World War I, the more I started looking into World War I, what happened in World War I, the people who fought in World War I, particularly on the German side of things, the more I started understanding why these people made certain decisions that they did that ultimately led them to become these big characters within the next World War. And a lot of people sort of look at World War I and World War II as sort of a continuation of each other. They aren't really World War I and World War II. They're just the same war. There was just a 20-year break in between. And that's how I look at the Godzilla Saga. It took that sort of idea and said, okay, the events of 2029 set up the events of 2048 and onward. And there's like a 20-year gap in between, and then shit hits the fan again. And it's been building up to that because of the events that happen within 2029. And a lot of the decisions that happen within 2029, the events of 2029, what happens particularly here, I live on Long Island. I actually went around Long Island and was picking places that, Godzilla could destroy and everything like that, and how things that happen within 2029 directly affect things that happen in 2048. For example, they're two side characters. They really are just side characters of the first book, Godzilla and King Kong, become two of the most prominent characters within the next trilogy, within the trilogy that follows. And that's sort of how that played out anyways. Justin brings up a very good point. It's also worth noting that people view the Second World War as a battle between good and evil, but in the First World War there was no clear distinction. You're absolutely right. In the First World War there was hardly any distinction at all. It was just a bunch of aristocratic jerks who built up their army and said, okay, let's fight, and that's exactly what happened. It's an utter mess. But World War II, there definitely were good guys and bad guys. I can't really say that with the Godzilla Saga. There's a lot of stuff that happens, particularly Colonel Glenn Adams, especially when he becomes the head of G-Force, which isn't really a spoiler. You see it all coming, and it's all been in the supplementary material I've been putting up on the Facebook page. When he becomes the head of G-Force, he makes some decisions, not only getting there, but as the head of G-Force, that you can question the particular morality of the whole thing. And that's essentially what a lot of, particularly the two concluding books of the Godzilla Saga really are. It's not so much a morality play as much as it is these big people colliding and creating something potentially worse and trying to figure out what's going on about it. These great personalities colliding, particularly with who is the head of Japan, because Japan has its own sort of thing. Something I do kind of I would love to sort of pimp out right now is I would love to pimp out on my YouTube channel. Excuse me. On my YouTube channel, there is indeed something called Concerning the Godzilla Vlogs. And Concerning the Godzilla Vlogs goes into a lot of the universe that is pre this series, because this is alternate history. The Godzilla Saga is something completely hi Martin, is completely alternate history. And what I mean by that is that 1954 happened. It happened. And things cascaded as a result of that. Nixon became president instead of JFK because he really played up on the fact that was the Russians' fault, and that was just enough to push him over the edge, because a lot of people don't realize how close of an election that was. All he needed was probably like 100,000 votes, and Nixon would have been president. I mean, it was pretty crazy. But there was sort of like a Republican monopoly forever until a little event known as the Second Iraq-Iran War. You know, we probably still would have gotten into the Gulf War and so on and so forth, but in this universe, Vietnam never happened because if Nixon was president, Nixon was very isolationist in his policies, or would have been, and so Vietnam probably wouldn't have happened. So on and so forth. The Cuban Missile Crisis in itself probably wouldn't have happened. And you know, he was sort of the pioneer of this idea of madman theory. You know, I'm crazy enough, I'm going to press the button to launch all my nuclear missiles at you. And, you know, Nixon was such a harsh anti-communist that I bet you the Russians would have believed him. It sort of brings up that statement, only Nixon could go to China. Only Nixon could go to China because China was communist. And Nixon was such a hardened anti-communist that if anybody else went over there, they wouldn't have taken it seriously. So that sort of thing. But it really cascades from there. And there's this big... It's sort of a reversal in politics because of some of the stuff that happens. Before 2029, or actually before that even, the Republicans are almost very globalist in a sense that they want to intervene on major things across the planet. They want to intervene on things that really are minuscule, but they seriously want to play up the fact that they are the #1 global power on the planet. I also want to say that their military spending is significantly higher in this universe than what it was even in our timeline, and it's still by far the biggest part of our budget to this day. And the Democrats are actually the ones that want to sort of close our borders. They are the ones that want to become more isolationist. They want to really cut back on all of that stuff. And they don't gain power until something called the Second Iraq-Iran War, which is what creates a lot of the characters within the first book of the Godzilla Saga. Because essentially in this universe, it's this universe's Vietnam. The draft was still in place in that time, and so on and so forth, or the draft policies, I should say, were still in place at that time, and so on and so forth. And it just becomes a giant, giant mess. I don't know how long the stream is going to be. The stream is going to depend on how many questions are asked, which if people want to start asking questions, they can now at any time. I'm just sort of talking right now. They can ask their questions at any time. But yeah, there was a lot of things. And what's interesting, Kaiju Con just happened. Over on Kaiju Cast. I know that Kaiju Cast isn't really a thing. I never listened to Kaiju Cast. I just never got into it. However, I did tune into Kaiju Con. Because of course, G-Fest was canceled for those living under a rock like I was. Didn't even realize that was going to be a thing because I just wasn't paying attention. And I tuned into most of them, and I was extremely happy. I loved Kaiju Con and everything like that. And there was one about the commentaries with Steve Rifle, Paul Rubenstein, and Richard. Is it Richard or Paul Rubenstein? I can't remember. He did the audio commentary to Godzilla's Revenge. And of course, the guy who runs Kaiju, or ran Kaiju Cast, I should say. And Steve Rifle went into something a little interesting there. And he sort of just brought it up in passing. But he did nevertheless say it. He said, Americans have always had a hard time adapting Godzilla simply because we don't have the message of the original Godzilla ingrained into our subconscious like the Japanese people do. And he said this many times. He said this on Twitter. He said this in his audio commentaries. And a lot of these big-time Godzilla historians out there. People who research the film history and everything like that, they all kind of come to that same conclusion that Americans can't really make a good Godzilla movie because we just don't understand what made the first Godzilla so important. Now I'm not saying I shouldn't say don't understand. I should say we never lived through it. We never experienced it. And I guess some way to reinforce that was Shin Godzilla, even though I know a lot of those Godzilla historians did not like Shin Godzilla because they think it went against the mantra that was the message of Ishiro Honda wanted and Takeo Murata wanted and all that jazz. But nevertheless, a lot of people got what Shin Godzilla was doing in Japan because that was the Japanese movie made by the Japanese movie made by the Japanese for the Japanese people. And somebody who knows a lot about the politics that is going on in Japan, primarily because I've been writing these glorified fan fictions that we're talking about right now, I got a lot of it. I can say I enjoyed a lot of Shin Godzilla more than probably regular Joe Schmo would here in the United States, just because I know the culture of Japan right now, the political climate of Japan right now, and what's going on globally to affect decisions that are being made over there. That's one of the reasons why I did that. But I can't really agree with that idea that Americans can't make Godzilla, or can't do it because it's not embedded into our subconscious like it is over there. I disagree, because I personally have never seen Godzilla as just a stance on anti-nuclear sentiments within a country or within a people. I mean, certainly that is the biggest one, but Godzilla has represented other things in the past. Or it just all depends on who the writer is and who really cares about Godzilla, who really wants to tell a story with themes and everything like that. And that's what I really wanted to do, because to me, Godzilla can represent just about anything as long as you care about it enough. I mean, Tomoyuki Tanaka himself said that Godzilla really is it really is about the folly of man, the arrogance of man. As long as our arrogance persists, Godzilla will exist. And I took that quote and kind of decided to run with it within the Godzilla saga. That's what I wanted to do with this. And a lot of what I did within the Godzilla saga was take current themes, current events, things that were going on within our country, within the world, really, particularly the Syrian refugee crisis, which, despite the fact that the news isn't reporting on it, is still going on. I took things like that and said, that's what I'm playing into here. That's what I want as sort of a backdrop to my own thing. Now, that didn't start until a lot later when I was writing these books, these sort of mantras. Because what happened was I watched The Mysterians, Shiro Honda's 1957 film, which is a very flawed movie, but I did a podcast on it because I was impressed with what I saw, and the gears in my mind were working, because The Mysterians is about a bunch of aliens that had basically screwed themselves over, are looking to get out of that and breed with our women, you know, and build and take a bit of land, which in that case was Japanese territory. And I said, you know, you could really remake this today and make it a huge commentary on the Syrian refugee crisis. You totally could. And I did an entire podcast on that, and a lot of people didn't agree with me, but that's all right. And that's something that I kind of drove me forward going into rewriting a lot of the Godzilla Saga, because the Godzilla Saga it's been almost completely rewritten now twice from the ground up, where things would be kept the same. You know, certain plot elements were certainly kept the same, characters were kept the same, and so on and so forth. It's just the presentation that was changed, and so on and so forth. One of the other things that I really like to put into the Godzilla Saga was this idea of populism. This idea of somebody who is completely anti-establishment, completely anti, you know, political ideologies and everything like that, and that individual becomes so popular not because of the establishment behind him, but because of the force of the people who are supporting him, the number of people who are supporting them. And I bet you people can infer who I'm referring to, or was inspired by, but I'm not going to mention the name here. It's more than one person, actually, I should say. I mean, even if you look at it in the context that I was originally looking at this as sort of like an inspiration from World War I and World War II, the same thing happened there. And I just took that, ran with it, and that was essentially what I was going to do here, because these stories don't just take place in the United States. This truly is a global series. I mean, the first two books do predominantly take place in the United States. However, the second book hops back and forth between Japan, Russia, and the United States, though it predominantly does take place in the U.S. And then the rest of the books, Book 3 takes place in Europe, and is about the complete and total destruction of Western Europe as we know it, the collapse of Western civilization in Europe as we know it. And then the final book takes place in Japan. And there's a lot of stuff that happens in between, you know, those books and that book that really make this a global effect. Now, one of the things that I really loved about doing with the Godzilla Saga, and I'm just rambling on now. One of the things that I really liked about it, what I like doing in it, is creating an idea of something that I want to happen within the books, and then figuring out, okay, now how is that going to happen? Now, that sort of goes against the idea of like what a writer like Shinichi Sekizawa would do. Shinichi Sekizawa, again, he predominantly wrote a lot of the old classic Godzilla movies that we know and love. His whole idea is... His whole idea was, don't get bogged down in the details, just keep moving. As long as the audience is entertained, they won't care. For the most part, I agree with that mentality, especially when it comes to movies. I tend to agree with them. But in terms of books, that is when I like getting into my nitty-gritty shit. And that was one of the things that I really wanted to dive into. And one of the things that always just fucking irks me in Godzilla King of the Monsters, the one that just came out, is Monarch has all of this shit built. All of this shit done. Where did they build it? How did they build it? Where did they get the funds to build it? How did they build it? And that was one of the things that I really wanted to try to tackle within the Godzilla saga, is I'm going to tell you exactly how G-Force was formed. I'm going to tell you exactly where they're getting their funding from, and how it can be a wonderful thing and yet it could be a bad thing as well. I'm going to tell you exactly how the deals were made to make G-Force, and how there's a lot of backstabbing, there's a lot of cutthroat stuff done, there's a lot of backroom deals that were going on that aren't necessarily good, but necessarily made something good. I'm going to tell you how they got this. I want to tell you how they did it. Because to me that fascinates me, and with a book you can do that. With a book you can really sit back and you can take your time explaining a lot of that stuff. While in a movie you really can't. But one of the other things that really irked me about Godzilla King of the Monsters, the new one, I can't believe I have to designate that now, is all the soldiers that were working in Monarch, the people that were in uniform and that were fighting, were wearing U.S. Army uniforms. Why? Are they a part of the United States government? If so, then why were they taking place in those public hearings the way that they were? They would be much more private than that, and they probably would have something more congressional than what they present in the movie. And also, the guys' beards and the hairstyles were completely out of regulation to what the U.S. Army dictates, which always bugs me in movies. One of the things that I really loved about 2014 was their attention to detail to what the military does. And I really got on board with it, is when Admiral Stenz walks into a room, he comes in from outside, and he takes off his cap. You're not really supposed to wear your covers indoors. That's a detail that always irks me when watching movies with military stuff in there. If you walk indoors, you're supposed to take off your cap. And that was the moment that I really got on board with the level of detail that was in 2014 that just wasn't there in Godzilla King of the Monsters. And that was one of the things that I directly wanted to address within the Godzilla saga. Because the one thing that I really wanted to do in the Godzilla saga was really establish that G-Force basically has become its own private military force. Though it was created by the UN, it sort of became a life of its own, particularly under the leadership and guide of Colonel Glenn Adams. And he sort of ran it like an army. He did exactly what he needed to do. He ran it like a business. He ran it with an iron fist, and because of that, he created his own uniforms, he created his own regulations, his own ranks, his own, basically his own massive hierarchy in G-Force. That is something that hasn't really been done with Godzilla thus far. The closest thing we've had to that is actually G-Force within the Heisei era Godzilla films, which was a big inspiration for what I was writing on. In fact, I would say the Heisei era Godzilla films were the biggest inspiration as a whole on these stories. And a lot of that what I applaud about the Heisei series is that they don't get too bogged down with the details as to what G-Force is and how it was created. But I love the fact that they know it's a part of the JSDF, the Japanese Self-Defense Forces. That it's always been, sort of a part of that. That's one of the things that I've always sort of liked about that, and especially in Biollante. I love the attention to detail in Biollante, how that's like a precursor to G-Force, and you can kind of see where G-Force was going. Again, big inspirations for the Godzilla saga in the direction that it ultimately went in. I'm not saying the styles are exactly the same, but I can gladly say that, and proudly say that the Heisei era was definitely one of the biggest inspirations. Definitely one of the biggest inspirations. Let's see. Let's go to chat for a moment. Let me check that out and see what's going on. Let's see. That's one part of King of the Monsters which raised my eyebrow. Those are plot elements I feel could have been included in Godzilla Aftershock tie-in comic. Oh, I didn't read that. I didn't bother to read that. I wasn't interested in reading that. But yeah, I agree with you. These could have been interesting things that they could have tackled into to really make this universe stand out, and yet they didn't. And that's something that always sort of bothered me about those. It's just so clear that they just really didn't care. Or worse off, they didn't not care, because at least then there's a mental decision that we don't care, we're going to move forward. Because at least that's a decision. That they didn't think about it is what probably happened, and that's a problem. That is a problem. I've had that problem before, of not thinking things through. And that's a problem on the writers. That truly is a problem on the writers that I have. It also doesn't help that all these movies have about a bajillion ghostwriters, which, if you don't know what ghostwriters are people who work on it without any credit. And that's a big problem as well. I think one or two voices is good, and 3 is pushing it in terms of a script and story idea. So I still stand by that, by the way. I still stand by that. First Pacific Rim does a better job at costume design. The Pan-Pacific Defense Corps. I actually love the universe of Pacific Rim. I love the attention to detail. Well, it's Del Toro. Del Toro's big thing is his attention to detail. Even in such a silly universe like that you're not supposed to completely take seriously. It's a dumb universe. You know, the story itself is pretty dumb the more you think about it, but it's fun. All deliberate decisions made by Del Toro and his writing, the people he was working with on the making of the movie. Those were deliberate decisions, and I always get on board with that. When you're making a deliberate call, a deliberate decision, sometimes good, sometimes bad, but it's a deliberate decision. I'll be more on board with a bad deliberate decision than I would be with something like I just said earlier, where they just didn't think about it. And Pacific Rim was amazing at the tiny attention to detail, like the religious aspect of the kaijus, which is something that I kind of dive into on the Godzilla Saga, but I sort of pushed that aside and more focused far more on the political side of things, just because, quite frankly, that is an area that interests me far more, is the politics of everything. Political dialogue, as it were. But Kaiju Blue, the drug that comes out of the blood of the kaijus and everything like that. I like the rank structure of the Pan-Pacific Defense Corps. That actually was a big inspiration for G-Force. Not so much in the fact that Del Toro deliberately didn't want that to be a military unit. I distinctly wanted G-Force to be its own military unit. However, I pulled my ideas from the Roman army and how they organized their shit. That's how I organize G-Force, pretty much. And it all sort of comes back to a very clear command structure, very clear hierarchy, and the hierarchy is everything in G-Force. If you want to climb the ranks, you have to know the hierarchy. And the hierarchy is extremely important in G-Force. That was one of the things that I wanted to really establish. Well, the Pan-Pacific Defense Corps, that's not really a big thing there. And it didn't really need to be because of that kind of movie, you know? And again, that was all a deliberate decision made by Del Toro and them, so... Godzilla can represent environmentalism, Martin. Sure, that's not necessarily something that I tackle in my series, but yeah, no, I'll agree with you on that. I'll agree with you on that. And in fact, I think Yoshimitsu Banno really tried to do that. Not saying he succeeded or failed. I personally think he did an alright job. But he definitely tried to do that, to steer Godzilla into a new direction. However, in terms of the environmental side of things, that's one thing that I wanted to play into with Godzilla a lot. And that's because every universe, in my humble opinion, of Godzilla has not captured the thing that's the most terrifying about Godzilla, and it's not Godzilla himself. And I make that very, very clear within the Godzilla Saga. The thing that people fear the most about Godzilla is not Godzilla himself, it's what that thing leaves behind. He is so radioactive. He's a walking nuclear bomb. It's the fallout that he leaves behind that people freak out about. And it's the fallout of what he does that completely destroys, for example, Western Europe. Western Europe is just in shambles at the end of the second book. Not so much because of what Godzilla himself has destroyed. I mean, he's only one monster. You can only go one place at a time, of course. It's the amount of radiation that is left behind, the fallout from his attacks, from his presence, that is just... to me, is the most terrifying aspect of him, and definitely the most horrifying aspect of any Godzilla thing. And that's never really been played in, with the exception of the original Godzilla, that has never really been played in on any other Godzilla thing. They usually focus on the destruction. They could just focus on destruction and the aftermath of that. Biollante does a great job at doing this, focusing on the aftermath of his attack and then the rebuilding after his attack, but they don't focus on the radiation aspects of it. And a huge influence on that was HBO's Chernobyl. HBO's Chernobyl, an amazing miniseries. I highly recommend you guys check it out if you can. Really inspired that, because then I started reading in so much more about radiation, so much more about the effects of radiation, what radiation sickness can do to you, and so on and so forth, how radiation can spread. And I started researching more and more and more about Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island, and even the atomic bombs of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but particularly the hydrogen bomb testings, and so on and so forth. And I took a lot of what I learned from that, and particularly in Godzilla vs. Biollante, my book, I should say, Godzilla vs. Biollante, I put a lot of stuff that I learned from that, a lot of the medical knowledge, a lot of the medical terminology and stuff, the breakdown of your cells and everything like that, the latency period of radiation sickness and so on and so forth. And I really wanted to play that up, and that definitely is the number one thing that scares a lot of people. It's especially in the third book. The third book, it's a huge deal that Godzilla's in Europe, in particularly Western Europe. There's a big fear, and there's a ferocious fight against Godzilla because of that. A ferocious fight. And I particularly wanted to focus on the bravery of those men who are fighting Godzilla and everything like that. There's actually, because of the events of 2029, there is an entire area. Long Island is a dead zone. So picture what happened in Chernobyl tenfold, and that's Long Island within this universe because of the events that happened in 2029. I won't get into the details of what happened in 2029, but because of the events that happened in 2029, it's called Area G. There's actually even an entire generation of children, an entire generation known as Generation G. And, you know, the effects of how women are developing ovarian cancers more and more and more, and thus they're having to get the surgery, hysterectomies, to remove their to have their ovaries removed so that they can't have children, or if they have children, the children die, they're stillborn, and things like that. Men oftentimes lose their lower stomach because of cancer cells that form in there because of their exposure to radiation. and thus they had to have an entire chunk of their stomach removed. That happens to several of the characters. Both of those happen to several characters within the Godzilla saga because of the amount of radiation that they were exposed to. And another thing that also happens is, what about the parents that were killed? You know, what about the people that are now gone? What's going to happen to the children of the aftermath of a Godzilla attack? Because it's quite clear that one of the first things that would happen with the mass evacuation, one is it would be a clusterfuck, which is something that I would definitely play up on. I definitely play up on in the Godzilla saga. But two, women and children would be a priority. Particularly children would become a major priority. And so part of the reason why they're called Generation G is because there's an entire generation of children who were just little kids at the outbreak of 2029 that are now parentless, that are living in these orphanages that have been set up all across the country. And that's actually Colonel Glenn Adams. That's his origin story. He was really young. I think he was 12 when Godzilla versus when the first book happens. And because of what he experienced in the orphanages there, and the people that bullied him, and so on and so forth, and the hell that he went through growing up, it definitely shapes not only his own personal repression, because he has a lot of that, but also shapes a lot of the policy decisions that he makes as the head of G-Force, and a lot of this mantra that he has going forward. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that, food, and so on and so forth. And for example, in 2029, of course, Long Island, New York City, and everything like that is a wasteland. So what's going to happen to the world economy at that point? What's going to happen to all of that? What's going to happen with Western Europe now that it's gone? That's stuff that I wanted to play into a lot with the Godzilla saga, and that's actually the stuff that I'm the most proud of within the stories. Are those. Let's see. Like, for example, the new Wall Street, essentially, is not really in New York anymore. It was destroyed. It's now in Miami, Florida, because I was doing research on it, and I was talking to a bunch of economists. Like, what would happen? I literally asked them, what would happen if New York was completely flattened and you had to move Wall Street somewhere else? What would happen? And they told me the ramifications, the economic ramifications of what would happen in great detail. In fact, on so much detail, I couldn't even remotely put most of that into the book. But also, I asked them, where would they move it? Where would it go to? And they explained they weren't sure. A lot of them said they weren't sure. But a lot of them said either Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, or probably Miami, Florida, because it needed to be a place that had access to the ocean, that was easily accessible, and so on and so forth. So that's why I made a decision to choose that the new Wall Street, or the new, economic powerhouse within the world, essentially, is now in Miami, Florida. So I had a lot of fun writing things like that and trying to explain things, or not necessarily explain things, but sort of give things away in dialogue. Another thing that I even went into was the fact that we don't see much for blue anymore in the world, and I don't mean like in terms of sky or anything. Of course we do, but I'm talking about in terms of clothing. Blue is one of the hardest colors to recreate. Blue and purple, and so what you see in uniforms are army uniforms is instead of blue, those navy blue pants that we sort of saw forever with ASUs. I know that they just recently replaced that, but have been switched to gray. So a lot of the uniforms are no longer that navy blue color; they're gray, dark gray or light gray, something like that, because it's just much cheaper to produce. Blue jeans kind of go away as a result. You see a lot of people wearing gray jeans instead because it's much cheaper to make and not adding color to it. Yeah, and that's a lot of reasons why, if you look at the uniforms within the Godzilla saga from all across the planet, you don't see many blues. Or if you do see blues, they're for a very specific and tiny portion of the army or whatever the military force is. You see a lot of grays and blacks. You see a lot of grays, and again, that's all because of the economic ramifications of what is going on. Gray is cheaper to produce because you don't have to dye it anywhere near as much as you do with blue, and it's cheaper to buy, it's cheaper to purchase, it's cheaper to make, therefore you get that color more and more and more often, because a lot of people don't realize this, but blue jeans aren't really blue. They dye it blue. Really, if you were to make jeans, it'd be pretty red. Not pretty red, it'd be pretty gray, and that's essentially what it is. Let's see, let's look at the comments for a moment. Let us also not forget GMK, where he was the ghost of people killed. I actually talked about that on a previous chat a while back. I talked about how I really loved that and how it worked really well as a double bill with GMK. It's an entire podcast on why I think the two work so well together. Justin. Let's see. My manga adaptation / remake of Atragon includes lesser represented cities such as Vancouver, Seattle, Vladivostok, so on and so forth. Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. Seattle is actually included in mine. It's included in Godzilla vs. Biollante. Something rather catastrophic happens there. I'll leave it at that. Oh yeah, that was one of the things that I really played up with. Biollante's design. I know that Biolante is supposed to be a good girl, and yes, it's a girl. Biolante is supposed to be good, and she is good within Godzilla vs. Biollante, the '89 version. But in my version, I just think that design is so evil and so nasty looking that I said I have to play that up. So that's exactly what I did. I definitely played that up. Okay. Ear itches. Kamanga might be female. I don't think Kamanga is female. It should be female because wait, Kamanga's the spider, right? And let me look this up. Yeah, Kamanga's the spider. It makes sense that Kamanga would be female because female spiders tend to be the dominant ones. They tend to be very matriarchal. It would make sense to me. One of the things that I want to show off, I'm actually going to do that right now. I'm going to show off some of the uniforms that have been going on within the Godzilla Saga itself. Let me just open this up here, and we'll get going. Let's take a look at G-Force. And again, you're going to see a lot of my love of history because of this. But let's look at the Army combat uniforms of G-Force, and as you can see, I have things laid out. And again, I was definitely basing it off of our real Army combat uniforms. I know that there's something else now. I can't remember what they're called, and I personally like the new uniforms a lot more than I like these things. But they're basic. They have the basic same structure, from what I could understand. I just can't remember what they're called. And so I based all of the uniforms from G-Force basically off of that in terms of their Army combat stuff. So again, you have the here's an enlisted officer or a commissioned officer. They have red. There's a dark red mixed with the black of their uniform. Then you have an engineer who is brown. I sort of based these off of Star Trek in some ways. Medical or scientist officer within G-Force, their uniform is blue as a secondary color. And then anyone who isn't a commissioned officer or an enlist, below those ranks wears white as their secondary color. So that's how you can really distinguish what level of rank somebody is within G-Force without really looking at it. I even designed like the hats and everything. Here are the hats. Yeah, again, based off of the caps from the Army combat uniforms. Yeah, here we go. Here you can see the helmets and everything like that, the different designs that I just sort of drew up on the side just because it's fun and goes more into the level of detail within the Godzilla Saga. I'm pretty proud of this sort of stuff. And again, there's the helmet I sort of based it off of and such. But yeah, I've always liked universes that really go into detail about the universe. And here are the dress uniforms. Again, here's a dress uniform for like a true officer. Again, the red beret is a big giveaway, but the buttons are red and so on and so forth. Now, the engineering and science officers, they don't have the belt. That's another way that'll give them away really quickly. Other than the color is that they don't have the belt that goes around their midsection, their waist. Well, anyone who is in the armed forces section of G-Force does. So, like, if you saw Glenn Adams walking down the street in his Army combat uniform, he would definitely be he would have that belt around, and his beret, which is a big thing. They would wear a beret. Would be red. His would be red. But somebody like Professor Murai, let's say Professor Murai, he's not really a part of G-Force, but he's just a character who's a scientist. He would wear a blue beret, and he wouldn't have the belt. If he was in G-Force, that's what he would sort of wear, and so on and so forth. Is not any of those. But again, you're seeing a lot of these sort of dark colors. We go over to the Japanese. A few of these I haven't really designed yet, but like the Japanese in particular, because of an event that happens, I tried to make theirs look more Asian, more traditional, and so on and so forth. And that's what I did. Like, here is general, the cap is definitely Oriental in design. It's actually inspired by Chinese communist hats. I'll even pull it up, I think. Oh, I got a text message. Yeah, Chinese. Yeah, there's two different uniforms. That depends on how high you are. This is a general's uniform, major general through lieutenant general. That you can tell what they are because they have the lighter shoulder pads than somebody like General Nakayo would have, who has the black shoulder pads because he's higher up. I had fun making these. I'm not going to lie. I had a lot of fun making these. Let's see. The governor's uniform. Ah, yes, the governor's uniform. In Japan, Shindo's government within Japan. Definitely, I wanted it to be sort of fancy, but I didn't want it to be militaristic per se, and that's sort of what I came up with. Again, you see a lot of the gray. There you have the red Shindo's emblem, the symbol of unity, which is a big theme within Shindo's Japan. But if you saw like a governor, because Japan is structured in a way where you would see a lot of It's actually kind of modeled off of America, and Shindo says as such, where now Japan is basically split in into what is essentially states that Shindo can really control, and there's an elected governor for each one of those states, and elected, he's not really elected. It has to be preferential choice from Shindo, and this is the uniform that they would wear if they would go to like a ball, a gala, or something really official. There's always like a council of 10, I believe is what they called it in the book. I can't remember. I'm sorry. I did a podcast on Shindo's government that really talks about the hierarchy of it. But the council of 10 in that meeting, if when the governors attend, they would be wearing this uniform. Without a shadow of a doubt. And again, there's that symbol in the back. Let's see. Then there is Shindo's police force. Shindo's police force they're known as the Red Collars. And again, one reason why they're known as the Red Collars is because their collars are bright red. That's what really gives them away. And I specifically wanted these to look very communist. Particularly Chinese and North Korean. I wanted them to be very communist looking. And I designed their hats off of the kepes that were found within the North, as you can see right here during the American Civil War. But I pulled a lot of inspiration from that. But this would be like the uniform that you would see them wearing on the streets. They would be patrolling up and down the streets and stuff like that. this is the type of uniform that they would be wearing, and such. Thanks, Justin. I'm glad you're enjoying the uniforms. Yeah, the red collars. The red collars essentially are their own military unit. They're very heavily inspired by both the Kenpei in the Japanese Imperial, when in the Japanese Empire, but they're more inspired by, yes, the SS within Nazi Germany. Because if you look at a lot of the stuff that was going on within Japan. Japan was so bureaucratic and has always been so bureaucratic, even during World War II, that it didn't reach the level that I wanted to. So I unfortunately kind of copped out and pulled a lot of inspiration from Nazi Germany on how the Red Collars were organized and run. Like, they have their own rank structure and everything like that. And the Red Collars and the JSDF do not get along very well at all. Because, you know, Shindo is giving preferential treatment to the Red Collars over the JSDF and so on and so forth. It's sort of a way to keep the JSDF on their toes and everything like that. And plus, the Red Collars are definitely loyal to Shindo. They are picked. They are hand-picked. Like, the Red Collars, in many cases, are physically, particularly physically, their physique, are usually the high-end parts of the JSDF and so on and so forth. And a lot of people joined the Red Collars because of an event called X-Day, which was this bad earthquake that basically sunk half of Japan. And that happens I believe in 2045, that's when that happens. That leads to the rise of Shindo and everything like that. Basically, Shindo is emperor, a self-anointed emperor of Japan. He's the ruler of Japan in this universe. And a lot of, particularly men, but women too, joined the Red Collars because they had nothing else they could do. This offered them a job. This offered them financial support, and thus they became loyal to Shindo as a result. So that's something that I wanted to plan, which was something that happened in Nazi Germany a lot. A lot of those SS officers did these horrible atrocities because of their undying loyalty to the Nazi ideology. To them, Nazism saved them, which it's a little scary the more you kind of think of it. Now, Shindo's uniform, I didn't really want to be uniform at all. I wanted it to be something very civilian looking, and I got inspired by Captain Kirk's uniform from Star Trek: The Motion Picture. I haven't designed it yet officially, but it would look very similar to Captain Kirk's uniform right here from Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Now, I don't really like any of the other uniforms within Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Again, very 70s, like grossly 70s. But I liked Kirk's. I think Kirk's looked really cool. Shindo's uniform would look very, very similar to that. Well, yeah, they definitely, Justin, the Red Collars definitely weren't. They're not an intelligence agency. They are sort of like a military police, so on and so forth. But yeah, there's some of the stuff that I've designed for that. And Britain has its own uprising because of events that happened because of Godzilla's landfall. They have their own sort of fascistic. Well, I don't call it fascism. Within and I mean fascism. I'm not talking about the modern idea of fascism, which is ridiculous. I'm talking far more about the actual ideals of fascism, because, you know, I actually read history. And there's a guy named Oswald Mosley from Britain that you guys should really look into. He's a fascinating character. But, like, the simplicity of their black shirt uniforms is fascinating to me. And so I revived that within this universe, particularly underneath a guy named Admiral Wilhelm. And you see, in this universe, it's not an organization. It has nothing to do with an organization. It's sort of this mentality of the militarists. And militarism becomes a big philosophical movement in this universe. Which I know militarism is technically a thing already, but it becomes a big ideal where the military takes control. Either by force, like they do in England, because of some horrible events that happened within that universe, or within that, or just this idea of a military man becoming president. Major McTavish is the president of the United States during most of the events of the next 3 books. And yes, and I'm not making a mistake, yes, I know about that, and it gets explained, I promise. But he is in the Army. That was one of the big appeals of him getting elected president, was the fact that he was a popularist, and he was in the Army. He had that military background, and thus the idea, the time of the militarists is coming. It's a big thing in Russia too. General Ursus, who is, in my opinion, an idiot, but I wrote him that way. He acted too soon. You know, he's too arrogant. He's too arrogant, but on top of that, he's too quick. He doesn't think things through the full way. And because of that, it bites him in the ass. But he is also a militarist. He sort of falls into that category of leaders. Glenn doesn't start off as a militarist, but he sort of naturally becomes a militarist as things sort of goes along. Glenn's mentor, General Shelburne, is not a militarist, though. General Shelburne is not a militarist. He believes in a republic. He believes in democracy and everything like that. Well, militarists don't necessarily believe in all that. They'll say that on the surface, but they believe in democracy as long as they're in charge, if that makes any sense. Shindo is definitely a militarist. He was a colonel in the JSDF. His right-hand man, General Nakayo, was definitely a militarist. Definitely a militarist. But Shindo is the one that actually really sort of kick-started that, because I explain in this universe, Shindo, while the bridge between World War I and World War II, there are books, a lot of books, that sort of revolutionized thought of fascism or communism or socialism and things like that, especially when the Great Depression really hit. I mean, one of the reasons why Hitler became so successful was because of Mein Kampf. That rambling, terrible book, and I mean that not just because of the philosophy, it's just horribly written, influenced a lot of people because it preached an idea, and so on and so forth. And it did captivate a lot of people in Germany, not just Germany, around the world. There were Nazi rallies in New York City. There were Nazi rallies certainly in Britain and France and so on and so forth, people who believed in the ideals of Nazism. I mean, Oswald Mosley was one of those people. He was extremely anti-Semitic. He really bought into that, and so on and so forth. Well, in the Godzilla Saga, it's a podcast. Not really so much a podcast. It's a series of lectures. I forgot how many parts. I want to say 6. But Shindo gave this sort of lecture of what he believes it should be the purpose of a government, how the government should be run, the hierarchy, the importance of hierarchy and structure within a government, and the importance of a military government, something that is run and strong for national defense. And that podcast exploded around the world. There were translations, there were, subtitled versions, it exploded around the planet and really took off amongst military units and military leaders in the world, because of events that happened, not just because of 2029. 2029 was definitely an eye-opener for a lot of people, particularly in the United States, especially within the United States. But just military men, military generals, and army brats in general, it really became popular with them. And the reason why it works out in Japan so well is because X-Day happens. It's a prediction that one of the things that Shindo predicted, and I don't really say this in the book because I didn't really need to, but one of the things that Shindo said is one day there is going to be a massive national crisis, and we are not going to be able to do a damn thing about it because we are so bent on bureaucracy. Our military will not be able to do what they need to do to protect our citizens and to protect our country because of the bureaucracy. And thus X-Day happens. Basically, the country descends into civil war. In comes Shindo from Hokkaido, and General Nakayo sweeps down and manages to reunite the country. And again, the idea of unity is big with Shindo. He's always preaching the idea of there's unity in strength, and there's strength in unity. That's his slogan, and he really harps on that. And thus Shindo becomes basically de facto dictator of Japan. He calls it a provisional government, but there's nothing provisional about it. And one of the things that Shindo always wanted to do was he wanted to make Japan more prominent on the world stage, a lot more prominent than what they are. And he realizes very quickly that they can't do that militarily. That's just dumb. They can't really do that necessarily politically up front, especially now that they have a new government. They need to be recognized as the government. What Shindo does instead in this universe is Shindo says, technology, information. Those are the two things that he focuses on a lot. In fact, a lot of people get their information throughout the books that lead to certain decisions being made because of indirectly Shindo's involvement. Shindo gets the information that they need, passes it to a back channel, and through deals, political deals, gets what he needs. One of the big things that Shindo needed to rebuild Japan was steel. They didn't have the necessary supplies to build what they needed to do to rebuild Japan. And so what he does is he sees an opportunity with a certain situation that happens with President McTavish in Russia. And he says, look, I can get you all the information you want. In exchange for this information, you will supply us with steel. And we'll also give you a little bit of money as well. And, yeah, I mean, President McTavish jumps on that. And so that's what Japan starts using as a bargaining chip. Shindo has dirt on literally everyone that he wants. He can... Japan becomes the number one, under Shindo's rule, becomes the number one powerhouse in terms of technology and information in the world. They totally kick America's ass in terms of not only technological advancements, but also just the power of information and how important that really becomes. And especially as we go forward with technology now, information is going to become more and more public, and information is going to become more and more and more important when it comes to political deals, wars, and so on and so forth. So that's what I wanted to play up with Shindo. That's his trump card. And that was something that I had a lot of fun developing, is that Shindo is like a puppet master. You know, he's got almost like a secret government going on behind the scenes, and so on and so forth. That's a lot of fun. That was a fucking blast to write, quite frankly. Now, in terms of designs of who these people are, and you can see a lot of them on Facebook, the Godzilla Saga's Facebook page. But I want to go into the Japanese for a little bit, because I really kind of want to show off like who these characters are kind of designed after, even their mannerisms and such. Let me just pull up that screen. There it is. Here we go. Okay. So, without a shadow of a doubt, Shindo is definitely Yotsuyo Tsuchiya. I couldn't picture anyone else being Shindo. I definitely modeled him after that, even in his design. Except it would be a young version of him. It wouldn't be an older one. It wouldn't be like Mr. Shindo from Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. Yeah, it definitely would have been him being younger. Shindo's not exactly an older guy. General Igarashi, who is probably he wasn't originally going to be a main character. He became a main character as the books went along. But he's designed after So Yamamura. He's definitely portrayed like So Yamamura. I've always found So Yamamura, even in the more brasher roles that he's played in movies, I always found him to be very fatherly or very grandfatherly. And that's General Igarashi, so I said, yeah, definitely needs to be him. Let's see. General Nakayo is definitely Toshiro Mifune. And I don't mean like Seven Samurai Toshiro Mifune either. I mean he is Toshiro Mifune, the militarist. Whenever Toshiro Mifune plays, particularly Toshiro Mifune's performance as Yamamoto in Midway is a big inspiration for General Nakeo. And General Nakeo is a fun character to write too. He is the enforcer, definitely the enforcer of Shindo's government. Yeah, people fear Shindo because of the might of Nakeo, and Nakeo is an undying loyalty to Shindo himself because of reasons that are eventually explained in the books and so on and so forth. Major Otane, who was a badass in the final book, definitely modeled after him. Definitely a lot of fun modeling characters after all that stuff. I had a lot of fun designing Japan and their ultimate importance within the universe in this one. No. Justin, to answer your question about Yoshio Tsuchiya's character was a prototype for Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah from Frankenstein Conquers the World, not at all. I believe that was just something completely unintentional. And stuff. Hold on one moment. I need to reposition that because no one can see your comment. Oh wait, yes they can. Never mind. I see a glow on one and then not a glow on the other. Sorry. But no, I don't think that was something intentional at all. I believe that was just similarities in the production. They really don't have many similarities other than that they're played by Tsuchiya. Just because one in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah is a completely fleshed out character and has some amazing moments and so on and so forth, while the other one is completely potential, is the definition. The one in Frankenstein versus Baragon is the definition of potential wasted. And other than the fact that they're from World War II and they happen to see something a little weird, that's about all that I can say. One is a coal mine worker. He's just an average everyday dude. The other one is a huge tycoon of the biggest corporation in Japan in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. I don't really see any other similarities, really, other than the fact that they both happen to fight in World War II. Which, again, is something that, to bring it back to the Godzilla Saga, that is something that I've really liked doing here, is certain events within, 2029. Something happens to Shindo, actually. Something happens to Shindo in 2029. Because, he was there, and it's not a secret anymore. I've revealed this and everything like that, and it doesn't need to be a spoiler either. But Shindo was a young lad. A little bit younger. He's a little bit younger than Adams, but Shindo was there in 2029. He was there in 2029. He saw Godzilla and everything like that, and it shaped him. I just know tomorrow. He saw his parents killed. He was raised by his grandparents, and so on and so forth. And he joined the military at a very young age, showed a lot of promise, and quickly rose to the rank of colonel. And again, a lot of the decisions and a lot of the philosophical stances that Shindo takes is because of what he saw in 2029. That's a recurring theme throughout all of the books, is that what people saw in 2029, policy decisions that were made in 2029, military actions that happened in 2029, affect decisions that are made within the future books. There are a lot of mistakes made in 2029 that people like Shelburne, people like McTavish vow not to make again, and it's a lot of the affects a lot of the decisions that they make, and it's quite fun. Cause and effect is a lot of fun. The butterfly effect is definitely in full swing within the Godzilla Saga. I am actually going to take just a small break because my throat is killing me. Ask anything related to the Godzilla Saga. Again, this is sort of a Q&A, but I've just been rambling off my ass non-stop this entire time. Ask any questions you have about the Godzilla Saga. I will gladly answer it. No matter how silly or how stupid, I will gladly answer it. I will definitely do that. So, I shall be right back, ladies and gentlemen. Alrighty, I'm back. Are there any Easter eggs or references to Honda's non-Godzilla films in the saga? There's a lot. Well, the thing is, they're very minor. They're just that they're Easter eggs. They're nothing big. Because I hate fan service. Absolutely detest it. And that was something that I wasn't going to do. The Markolite Faps. I don't call them faps because, you know, fapping is funny. But the Markolites are a big deal in the Godzilla saga. There's a weapon that's being developed. The Masers is a Maser program. The Markolite is a side of the Markolites sort of led into the Maser. Sorry, the Masers led to the Markolites in this universe instead of it being the other way around. There are super weapons like that that are developed to specifically combat Godzilla. They're being developed beforehand, and then they just get perpetually larger because of the threat of Godzilla. In fact, the bulk of G-Force's arsenal are Maser and Markolite weapons. They have Maser jets, very similar to the ones that we see in what was it, Godzilla... Yeah, Godzilla and Mothra, the Battle of Earth in the Heisei series. We see stuff like that, but yeah, we do see a lot of things like that within this universe. How did the process of creating the look for the kaiju go? They just went on personal, mainly just, you know, personal preference. You know, I personally, my favorite design of all time is the 91 suit design, and particularly the 91. I don't care what people say. I always considered the 91 Godzilla suit different from the 89 one, and I think the 91 suit looks better than the 89 one. But it all just stemmed from preference, and yet my second favorite suit of all time comes from the one in Godzilla against Mechagodzilla and Godzilla Tokyo SOS. I love that suit. I love that design. And so I just kind of combined the two, and that's the main... We dubbed it Saga Goji. That's the main Godzilla that we see in the trilogy that follows. The Godzilla from 2029 is definitely far more based off of Heisei Godzilla, definitely far more bulky. And the only thing that sort of drew inspiration that wasn't out of that was I was going through a big Batman phase at the time, and I said I want this to be Old Man Godzilla from The Dark Knight Returns, that kind of deal. And so he's a little more blocky than before, but he's also a different species of Godzilla. In this universe, there's multiple different species of Godzillas within this, and I've covered this before in another Q&A that I did about the Godzilla Saga many years ago. But one of the things that fascinated people within that live stream was that there's multiple different species of Godzilla. But essentially, the Godzilla, you know, there's the one from Japan, then there's Godzillasaurus giganticus, which is the North American species of Godzilla, the bigger species of Godzilla. There's one from South America, there's a species from Africa, and so on and so forth. You know, things like that. That's stuff that I really wanted to play in. You know, the idea that Dr. Yamane, after 1954, grew really obsessed with Godzilla and was the main researcher on Godzilla forever. And he was the one that sort of discovered that they were social creatures. They hunted in packs. They were apex predators. And that there was multiple different species and subspecies of the Godzillasaurus, and so on and so forth. And he's the one that really catapulted all that, inspired a lot of the characters from the first book. Dr. Yamane was an influence on them, and so on and so forth. So that was something that I really liked doing, because that was one of the things that I wanted to portray within this universe, is that kaijus, and they do call them kaijus, because of Godzilla's attack. There have been other kaijus before. In fact, a lot of people say in this universe that dragons were actually dinosaurs, or not dinosaurs, but these monsters, just on a much smaller scale. And Godzilla in this universe is something completely abnormal, unlike anything before. In 1956, Rodan attacked China. There was a Rodan in China that got dealt with. In the Congo, there was Manda. In South America, there was Anguirus, or a member of the Ankylosaurus family, or the Anguirus family, I should say, which was taken from you know, Godzilla raids again, and so on and so forth. There have been monsters that have just popped up every once in a while, and they're usually swiftly dealt with in many ways. Then comes Godzilla, who can't be stopped, is a fucking walking nuclear bomb, can somehow survive that. And that was one of the things that I really played up with in the Godzilla saga, in terms of how to explain Godzilla off and stuff like that. There's a lot of theories as to how it works, but they never find out officially what it is, because they can't exactly go up to a dead Godzilla and dissect him. One, they would die, and two, the Godzilla is alive and well, and he wouldn't exactly like it if you did that. And one of the big things, and it's actually one of my favorite lines I've ever written, was Professor Demoris, who helped design a lot of these sort of modern nuclear reactors within the United States, and so on and so forth, because nuclear power became very big in this alternate universe, for energy, not in terms of nuclear bombs, but I mean like just for energy to power your towns and everything. That was one of the things that I highly enjoyed. But Demoris said, we're literally going to have to rewrite all of the biological textbooks that we've ever had. Godzilla throws all of that stuff away. He makes no biological sense, which is my way of basically writing off the fact that Godzilla exists in this universe, because, you know, really Godzilla just could not exist. And so I said, well, we'll just write it where he completely breaks what we think of how biology works, and we play with that. That's what I wanted to do. Let's see here. Would you ever consider doing a book or just art or anything about these different species of Godzillasaurus as supplementary material for fun after the saga is done? No, I don't think I would, because to me, the fact that there are different species of Godzillasaurus is not the thing that I have the most fun writing, and it's not the thing that I wanted to focus on. It's just one of those sort of side details that I wrote to give this universe a little bit more flavor. Is that there are just other species of Godzilla. And that was one of the things that I wanted to really establish, is that there's a Godzilla in 2029, and there's two Godzillas in 2029, really. And one of them is the Godzillasaurus giganticus, the larger species, and one of them is just a regular Godzillasaurus. And they dubbed the Godzillasaurus, the original one, as the one that attacked 1954. That's the species that attacked Tokyo in 1954, and so on and so forth. This isn't something that I'm necessarily really interested in going into more detail than I have on. I think just the fact that there are multiple different species out there and subspecies and so on and so forth is enough to satisfy myself. That's something that I would leave up to fans, other people, to sort of draw art up on about things such as that. And again, that's something that I love about the book medium in general. Is I love the fact that a lot of stuff is left up to the imagination, and you can visualize it in your head. I know whenever I read a book or listen to it on Audible or anything like that, huge fan of audiobooks, by the way. Which, by the way, prepare for the Godzilla Saga audiobooks. They're going to be something. They're going to be awesome. Is I sort of picture, while reading these and listening to them, I picture them like movies. You know, high angle, low angles, wide shots, sounds, designs, costumes, and everything like that. And that goes into the filmmaker in me. But that's something that I really had a lot of fun with doing. I would sort of approach it like Frank Herbert did with Dune. I know that sort of sounds like I'm blowing my own trumpet, and I'm in no way comparing my stuff to Frank Herbert, because quite frankly, Frank Herbert is a significantly better writer than I am, and he always will be, but he did a lot of this sort of work within sorry. I'm not sure what happened there. Within his own universe. And in fact, that was in many ways an inspiration towards the level of detail within this universe. However, I just pulled more from history than he did. He was literally getting high and pulling stuff out of his ass. A lot of it. Not completely, don't get me wrong, but... Now, the biggest inspiration for this universe was actually Timeline 191, which was a series of 11 books that I read. Called Southern, also known as the Southern Victory Series. What if the Confederates had managed to win their independence in 1862 during the American Civil War? And I read those books, all 11. All 11. I didn't stop putting them down. I kept reading them. And it really opened my fucking eyes to world building and adding details and so on and so forth to your story. And those books are amazing. You don't even need to be a fan of history to understand those books. They're just so cool. The level of detail that those alternate history books really flesh out in this universe. You know, like Black Uprising, how they become communist and everything like that, and the type of weapons that we're using. You know, Browning wouldn't be a thing. The Mormons would become a big issue. They wouldn't be, you know, things like that. A lot of stuff that, you know, normal people, kind of like me, would just sort of glance over. That series, it becomes a big deal because of the fact that the South had won their independence. And that really opened my eyes to needing so much detail. And I have to thank a podcast, too. They're called Talkernet History. It's a very small podcast, but I listen to them religiously. Talkernet History. Matt and Max are the two guys that host that show. And they got me into Timeline 191. They got me into that book series. They were the ones that convinced me to do that series. But they have a great podcast where they go over a scenario in history and they just say, okay, well, what if this happened? And they sort of discuss the different alternate scenarios that could have resulted in a specific point in history. And Timeline 191 really just freaking opened my eyes to a lot of what could be done. A lot of what could be done. Oh, man. I have not been used to talking this long for quite a while. How have you guys been? I hope you guys have been doing good, especially through COVID. Excuse me. COVID has definitely taken a toll on us here at AN Productions. That's for damn sure. Alrighty, if there is anything else... Well, rating's all you can do. I try to write 3 pages of something a day. One of my mentors, I like to call him more than a professor. He was really a mentor for me, Ken Kelsch. He shot a lot of movies and stuff like that. Some big movies, such as Bad Lieutenant and everything. But he told me that if you want to write, you should write at least 3 pages of something a day. It doesn't need to be a script. It doesn't need to be a book. It could be the outline to something. But you want to write 3 pages a day. And I have adhered to that as best as I can. I try to write 3 pages of something a day. And I've said it definitely kills writer's block, I'll tell you that. And I've been trying to tell other writers that as well, to at least try that. Write 3 pages of something a day. Now, a lot of people are shocked, but I can go through 3 pages in no time flat, especially if I go on a rant. I can go through three pages. Like, people get shocked. Like, I showed them that the first book in the Godzilla Saga is over 400 pages, and they're like, how the fuck did you write that? And I'm like, well, it wasn't easy, you know, per se, but once I get writing, I write a lot. And so on and so forth. Let's see, Godzilla vs. Titanosaurus, which is the other book that I completed, is closer to 500 pages. And yeah, I'm very happy with that. I'm very proud of that. Not that length is always a good thing. I've read a lot of books where they are far too long. Excuse me. Particularly fan fiction. I've read a lot of fan fiction that just like to meander. And I think they get obsessed with the word count. The authors in fanfics. Yes, I read fan fiction. I'm writing a fanfic. What do you want? A lot of authors get really, really pinned down in the word count. And thus they put in a lot of fluff where nothing really happens. It's just an inner monologue of a character. And I'm like, that could be cut. Or that could be trimmed significantly. And I gotta say, reading fan fiction has helped me a lot of what not to do. And writing this has taught me a lot of what not to do. That's one reason why I started writing those short horror stories so much. Because I would learn something, try to implement it within the Godzilla Saga, because the Godzilla Saga kind of became a playground, because it wasn't anything official. I'd never make money off of it. I would never make money off of anything Toho related, because Toho would sue my ass and kill me. Chop my head off and put it on a frickin' pike. So I sort of played with a lot of writing and so on and so forth, writing styles and different writing styles within the Godzilla Saga. Took what I learned from doing that and wrote a lot of those short stories, and it's actually another official novel that I've been writing called Unending Rails that I've been really working on, which is a novel itself. I have been sort of working on that on the side, particularly on the outline. I'm still in the outline phase of it. But I'm taking a lot of what I learned from writing the Godzilla Saga and implementing it there. But yeah, it's definitely really funny because I still have the first draft of Godzilla and King Kong, the first book, which I wrote in 5th grade. It's 170-something pages, handwritten. You know, and if you go on ANP's Instagram, you can see pictures of it. Yeah, I took a lot of pictures of it. But it's just really funny. Character names changed. It's definitely certain characters were combined or cut out. Some characters were added, and plot lines were added. But the basic idea was always there way back in 5th grade, and I always found that funny for the Godzilla Saga. And it had like little drawings and everything and on that, and little diagrams and maps of where Kong's island was, and blah 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 blah, and why they were there and why certain decisions were made. So this idea of me trying to build the universe was there all the way back in 5th grade, even before I knew a quarter. I can't stop yawning. All the seeds were there long before I even had an inkling of a quarter of the knowledge that I do today. So I found that really, really, really funny. It was actually kind of heartwarming. I was actually kind of touched. I was like, this is where it began. And it put a big shit-eating grin on my face, that's for sure. Let's see what Justin's writing. Not only is Atragon my favorite Toho Tokusatsu film, I feel it definitely needs a reboot, hence why I wanted to do manga adaptation and remake. You should. And I would love to read it whenever you're completed with it. I would absolutely love to. I love Atragon, as I stated in Ishiro Honda-thon, and I still stand by this opinion. That is Ishiro. That is my second favorite Ishiro Honda movie. Granted, I haven't seen a lot of his non-tokusatsu movies. I have seen Farewell Rabal. Farewell Rabal is very good. I very much so enjoyed that movie. Now, somebody commented on a live stream I did before where they said, and I quote, so basically you like Ishiro Honda's movies, but you don't like Ishiro Honda the man. That is not true. That is not true at all. What I don't like about Ishiro Honda is his philosophy, his idea of what was it? His idea of pacifism. I do not believe in pacifism whatsoever, and a lot of that mentality comes out in not just the Godzilla Saga, but in everything I write. That sort of philosophy sort of comes out in there, because I do not like. I do not believe in pacifism. I believe if you want to change something, you don't just sit around and do nothing. If you want there to be change, you have to go out there and make the change happen yourself. And that's actually a theme within the Godzilla Saga as well. But just because I disagree with his personal philosophy does not mean I wouldn't like the man. I think Ishiro Honda would have been a wonderful man to work with. Everything that I hear was he was a stern man. Well, he was a very serious man on set. A very kind director. And he let the actors do a lot with their characters, which is something to be said, something that I need to work on as a director. And I think he was also a very wonderful person. From everything that I've read about him, everything that I've heard about him, that he was a very kind, gentle-hearted man, which goes into why he has pacifism was his philosophy and why he kind of got screwed over by Toho and pigeonholed as much as he was, just because that's the kind of guy that he was, unfortunately. So, yeah, just because I don't like his philosophy does not mean I don't like the man. And let's face it, a lot of his movies, even his weaker ones, are in the very least enjoyable. Like King Kong's Escapes. That's not really the high watermark of Ishiro Honda cinema, but definitely enjoyable. A lot of fun. So that's more than I can say for a lot of directors. So, I mean, he is my favorite director. He definitely influenced my visual style a lot. I love his simplicity and so on and so forth. Ooh, we're getting some comments. I can't say that Mark's series of Godzilla novels were an inspiration at all. In fact, I believe I read his books. Let me just look him up really quick. I want to make sure that it is the right guy before I give an answer here, Shay. But, yeah, no. His books I did read when I was younger. I got bootleg copies of them either digitally or someone from the library got them for me. And I can say they were influences on me in the way of this is how I'm not going to write my books. That is the only thing that really influenced me by. In fact, you can actually see the book behind me. That guy, Jeff Shera, is the #1 influence on me in terms of my writing style. Not completely, don't get me wrong. But he is the main guy that influenced my writing style and how I've approached writing the Godzilla Saga. The book behind me is A Chain of Thunder about the Siege of Vicksburg. But he's the #1 guy. What he doesn't like sci-fi. No, I guess he does like sci-fi. his father, Michael Shara, than the Killer Angels, was a sci-fi writer. But no, those books didn't really inspire me at all. They basically told me this is how not to write my books. And the main reason why is because I hate getting into the heads of the monsters. I hate the idea that they are sort of having inner monologues and stuff like that. I like writing it from the point of view of the people, looking at the monsters and trying to decipher what they're thinking. To me, that makes them a little more frightening and makes the whole thing a little more relatable. Personally, that's just a thing. You never jump into the heads of the monsters in my series. All right, what is... Let's see. Let me pull that up again. What is your ultimate goal for the Godzilla Saga graphic novel approached by studio to produce the film series? That would be nice, but that's not going to happen. Do you have ultimate dreams of where it could go? No, I can tell you right now that my main goal with the Godzilla Saga is to just make them into as epic of an audiobook as I possibly can, as epic as an audio drama as I can, and eventually release that online, along with the PDF to the books themselves, because I know a lot of people don't like audiobooks. Or a lot of people that read don't like audiobooks because they like taking their time with the books. I definitely release the PDFs as well. However, my main goal is to just simply get it released on audiobook, an audiobook released on my YouTube channel. Nothing official. Well, official, quote unquote. Again, it's just glorified fan fiction. That's what this is. Nothing to take really too seriously in terms of expectations or goals. My goals are very. My goals are very grounded within reality, I'll say that. But I'm really looking forward to doing the audiobooks for these because I've got voice actors all lined up and everything like that want to show off their chops and so on and so forth. So I'm really looking forward to that. Let's see. Justin says Honda was also one of the few guys to befriend Takashi Kimura, who was a real edgelord. Yeah, Takashi Kimura was definitely a weird guy. Definitely somebody that I probably wouldn't like working with. But the only reason why I think I know that he liked Ishiro Honda, but the only reason why I think those two got along was because they wrote the more serious ones. And I know David Callett would like to fight me on that stance, but I have to say, evidence shows that Takashi Kimura was the more heavier of the two writers, while Shinichi Sekizawa was the more lighthearted, more fun, and more commercially successful writer, kind of as a result. Takashi Kimura and Ishiro Honda, I think, got along better as a duo, simply because they took their stuff pretty seriously, especially early on. And while, if you really look at it, Shinichi Sekizawa and Jun Fukuda were a good dynamic duo because they made more lively movies. They just wrote more. They wanted to have more fun, and so on and so forth. Look at The Secret of Telegian. Jun Fukuda and Shinichi Sekizawa, I think, was a match made in heaven. I think they work out really well together, and so on and so forth. Let's see. Let's see. I'm working on a treatment, and I am still playing. Oh, that's meant for somebody else. Shay, no, I did not really care for his novels that much. That's nothing against him. I like the fact that he wrote those books. I think he's a pretty cool guy. He was a pretty cool guy to listen to, and so on and so forth. But I just didn't care for those books. That's all. And I know that they're meant for children, and I certainly got into them when I was a little older, and that did have a lot to do with my enjoyment of them. Sort of like me and Showa Gamera. You know, if I really got into those movies when I was a lot younger, I probably would like them a lot more than I do today. But it doesn't mean that they didn't do their job. I think they did succeed at their job. Amazing artwork on them, too. Just not my cup of tea. No, just not my cup of tea. Kind of like Godzilla comic books. I don't really read Godzilla comic books because they're not my cup of tea. Comics aren't really my cup of tea either. I think they sort of, at that point, if you're going to write a really... Well, my problem with Godzilla comics is more of the fact that I think the stories are too simple and they're too limiting. And if you're going to go all out, just write a graphic novel. If not, you only have 24 pages to tell a story, and I think that's not enough for the types of stories that these people are trying to tell. The only Godzilla comic book series that I really liked and got on board with was Godzilla in Hell. I actually really liked the arc that he sort of goes through in that, and that was such a simple tale that it worked perfectly with that medium. And yeah. Let's let's see what else is going on here. What else is going on? If you were where to have your if you were to have your Godzilla Saga series of novels made into films, which is unlikely, you could collaborate with Toho on another major films and another major studio and get distribution rights. Oh yeah, I know all about that. Yeah. Yeah. But that's essentially what I would try to do. See, the thing is, if these are to be made into movies, they would have to be a couple of stipulations with them. One is I would have to be a director. Well, there's basically two options. One is I would have to be the director, but I could not be the writer. Somebody would have to adapt these novels into a script that wasn't me. Or two, I would be the main writer, meaning I would be the one adapting my novel into a book, into the novels into a screenplay, and so on and so forth. Somebody else would have to be the director. Because to me, I am so personally attached to these books, my objective mind on them is skewed. And on a film, you cannot have that. You absolutely positively cannot have that. And that's why I would need to be one or the other. So on and so forth. Who are the kaiju that exist in this world and which are spotlighted? Well, Biollante, Godzilla, duh. Godzilla, Biollante, Titanosaurus, Mechagodzilla, and Gamera. Those are the three. Those are the kaiju that exist in this universe. And again, I have Gamera in here. Well, and King Kong, I guess. Though I really actually regret putting King Kong in here. I think I honestly really regret putting King Kong in here. If I were to go back into completely rewrite the books from the ground up, one, it would require a lot more work, and I don't really want to put much more work into Godzilla and King Kong at all. But no, I'm not saying that as like a bad thing or a knock on the books. I just mean I put this much hard work into it. I'm happy with what it is. But Kong, I would make Kong Sanda from War of the Gargantuas, just because I would have more freedom with the character as a whole. And a 200-foot tall gorilla, I think, is just too ludicrous for my liking in this universe. There, I said it. But whatevs. Though I do think putting Godzilla up against what is a naturally created creature is a interesting idea, and one that I pray God that they tackle with Godzilla vs. Kong in 2021, if that movie ever gets released, that is. Also, I doubt you could get the rights to both Kong and Gamera if they were to be made into films. Yeah, I know. These are fan fiction. I can do what the fuck I want. As I said, you know, I have no stipulation. I used to sort of hide the fact that these are fan fictions, glorified fan fictions. Now that's what they are. They're glorified fan. These are glorified fan fictions that I put a lot of work into, that I have no real plans for going forward. I would love to make them into movies. I know that they most likely won't. My focus on my own personal film career is focused elsewhere. It's just that these are glorified fan fiction, and so on and so forth. That's all I can really look at this as. So on and so forth. Are there any kaijus you wanted to include, but ended up dropping them due to some reason or other? Mothra. Literally Mothra. The original idea I had for the first book was Mothra was going to be in there to sort of mediate Godzilla and Kong. And there was going to be the two fairies and everything like that. I just completely dropped her the fuck out of this series because I wanted to keep this series more grounded in reality and not fantasy. And so on and so forth. Sure, Gamera has a little bit of legends, but I even explain Gamera away as being very scientific and so on and so forth. In fact, I brought up at the very beginning of the stream Ace Combat 5 that I just recently replayed Ace Combat 5. One of the greatest games of all time, certainly within my top 5, but they mentioned in Ace Combat 5 this idea of Rosgreaves, a demon and everything like that, and they give it a scientific explanation not a scientific explanation, but they sort of play into that idea with reality into that, and that it sort of creates its own legends within this army group or this Air Force group. That's actually really inspired me on this one. Gamera is kind of like that. Gamera is, can be explained scientifically. It has nothing to do with the legend at all, the Okinawan legend as I explain it at all, but it just happened to kind of fit some things, and so they call him they call him sort of a legend. But that's the most fantasy I get into in these books. That's about the most fantasy I get. Let's see. Save Mother. Why'd you say? Yeah. Let's not talk about Batman v Superman. Though, you know what? Fuck it. I am gonna watch the Snyder Cut of Justice League when it comes out. Fuck it. I hate myself, I guess. Yes. Jet Jaguar, I wasn't going to get into it, but you called me out on it. Jet Jaguar is actually the thing that saves the day in the Godzilla Saga. There's not just a chance. Jet Jaguar is in the Godzilla Saga. Jet Jaguar saves the day. Jet Jaguar comes out of nowhere. Yeah, designed by a gay couple and their younger brother who is and one of them's younger brother who is way too young for some fucking reason. And yeah, Jet Jaguar comes in and just rapes Face. Did any of you ever see that? Like, I think they got in trouble for it, but when I went to G-Fest a while ago, Robert Scott Field leaked a little teaser trailer of Jet Jaguar versus M11 that they sort of made. It was just like a little fan trailer thingy, and it was hysterical. I loved that shit. It was so funny. So funny. You even had the Robert Scott Field M11 run in there, but yeah, it was funny. I don't think that's been released online at all. I don't think they can release it online, but yeah, I know. Godzilla versus Megalon. Like, what the fuck is their relationship? Those two older guys, Goro and the other guy. What is their relationship? We know that Goro and the little boy, they're brothers. But what is the two older guys' relationship? Are they just... I mean, yeah, you can see them as best friends, but are they brothers too? They never say anything, so I just like to assume that they're just gay lovers. Very progressive film. A lot of people don't give Godzilla vs. Megalon enough credit, but I think Godzilla vs. Megalon... Oops, that's not the screen I want to go to. Sorry. Godzilla vs. Megalon is a very progressive film. Yeah, a lot of people don't give it enough credit for its social commentary on homosexuality, to the point that there's no women in the movie at all. Yeah, it's all about gay love, bro. And the only women that are in the movie have that medicated look and are wearing Ku Klux Klan hats. So yeah, the social commentary is real in that movie. God, I love Godzilla vs. Megalon. There, I said it. I think the movie is just so stupid and a lot of fun. A lot of fun. If you can, listen to the audio commentary with Stephen Galbraith IV and Steve Reifel. It's a wonderful audio commentary. Message retracted. Ugh. What is this madness? Whatever. Oh, man. You know, I wrote fan fiction in the past, and I found the books, too, where it was Godzilla, Megalon, Gigan, Mechagodzilla, Anguirus. They were all in it, and it was like my friends and I, and because I used my friends and I's real name, wrote it in the first person too because I'm dumb. But it exists where I'm in the city and suddenly Megalon comes out of the ground. I wrote an entire fan fiction, and I read it again. Terrible, but again, I was like in 5th, 6th grade when I wrote it, and definitely in vain of Showa Godzilla. So like even then, I was so shocked that even then I understood that there were eras to Godzilla, eras to Godzilla, and that each era had a distinct feeling to it. It was really funny, really fucking funny to write, to read and look back on. I'm like, yeah, I wrote that. Yeah, Yeah, and that's exactly Shay. That's exactly how to look at Godzilla versus Megalon. Is it's dumb fun at its finest. It was a movie made to entertain children, and I think it did in droves. It certainly entertained me as a kid. In fact, I would watch it a lot. Every time it came on Sci-Fi, I would watch it. I had it taped on a little VHS tape too. I watched it every time. Yeah, that's how you should need to look at those movies, and that's how I look at that movie. That's how I look at a lot of the Showa Gamera movies too. Is that these movies were, even though I wasn't a kid when I saw most of them, other than with Jiger. Jiger was like really the only Gamera movie other than the original Gamera the Invincible that I watched when I was a kid, and I loved Gamera versus Jiger as a kid, and I still love it. I have a soft spot for that movie. But I look at those movies as entertaining children, and I know they entertain children because when my mother took care of kids, a lot of times what I would do to sort of cover her ass while she was cooking lunch or something like that to help out during the summer is I would put on a movie and all the kids would watch it. And particularly the younger kids absolutely loved Gamera. So, Showa Gamera. I always put on Showa Gamera. And they absolutely loved it. So I know it still entertains kids to this day, so I think it definitely succeeds in droves. Godzilla Kiryu, Gigan, and Megalon is the ultimate kaiju duo. No one can tell me otherwise. Absolutely. The amount of character that they managed to give Megalon, that the suit actors gave Megalon and Gigan in that movie is hysterical to watch. Seriously, pay attention to their mannerisms and how they interact with each other. It's awesome, and I really love that shit. It's so funny. It's hysterical. I love it. Not Saga related, but I just recently watched your GMK Shin video. GMK bothers me because Ghidorah should never be portrayed as a good guy. Of all kaiju pick for that, why him? Why not Rodan? Well, Toho's the reason why. Ghidorah was a more marketable character. That's why. It was originally going to be Varan, and they realized King Ghidorah could be marketed more, so that's why. But I disagree with you, personally. I think Ghidorah can be a good guy. He just depends on the writer, and I think they did wonderful with him in GMK. I think it worked very well in GMK. In fact, if I were to make the Godzilla Saga into movies, I know I wouldn't be able to use Gamera, and I made the decision immediately that I would make Gamera King Ghidorah in the Godzilla Saga, and yes, he would be a good guy. God damn it, there, I said it. I would rewrite his origin and everything and make him a good guy. I don't care. I think it really does depend on how you write him, and I think Shizuka Kaneko and his writing staff on GMK did a fine job with King Ghidorah being a good guy. I didn't care. It did when I was a kid, I guess, because, you know, King Ghidorah was always the bad guy before that. But as an adult, it didn't bother me at all. Doesn't bother me at all. It's a Guardian of Earth, yeah. Well, it's a very fantasy-based movie, and as a result, I buy it. As a result, because it's definitely based in fantasy. I mean, Godzilla is possessed by those Japan harmed in World War II and killed in World War II because of their atrocities. So you can't get much more far-fetched than that. So yeah, I could totally buy it. Yes, it does make total sense, Justin, why they changed Varan and Anguirus to Mothra and King Ghidorah, and that's because there hadn't been a movie that bombed with those two movies, those two monsters in them. And so Godzilla vs. Megaguirus did not do very well at the box office, and thus they wanted something more marketable. That is why they chose, and it makes perfect sense why Toho made this decision, said, no, you need to make those two monsters, Mothra and King Ghidorah. Would I have liked to have seen Varan and Anguirus? Sure, but I love the movie that we got. So that's all I'll really say about that. But the producer in me completely understands why Toho made the decision they did. I'm sure that if you at least make him stronger, and it would be better fight than in GMK, I'd be good with that. Well, he's a baby in GMK, too. I really like that. He wouldn't be a baby in mine, no. No. He would be weaker. He would be weaker than Godzilla. He would have to be, because Godzilla is the king of the monsters. And in my universe, Godzilla is in the Godzilla Saga. Godzilla is not a good guy remotely. Not a good guy remotely. He's not even ambivalent remotely. No, he's pretty fucking evil in my universe. Another thing too is he's not charcoal gray in my universe. He's black. His skin is pitch black. That's how I describe him as. Who would have been my Guardians of the Earth? Mothra would have been on there. However, I think she... If GMK did not exist, and I was completely going into it blind, I think Mothra would have replaced King Ghidorah. I'm not sure who the other two monsters were. I would have loved Baragon. I like Baragon too, but I would have picked probably some lesser monsters, and then the main Guardian be Mothra, just because I think that makes sense and that fits her character. That's part of it, Justin. That is part of the reason why those movies were so successful, but not the entire reason. In fact, far from it. One of the reasons why the Gamera series were as successful as they were was because they had significantly smaller budgets than the Godzilla movies that were made in the Heisei era. Therefore, the margin of profit, though technically the fact that they made less than any of the Heisei Godzilla movies, because they had smaller budgets, their margin of profit was significantly larger. Anguirus was robbed. I love Anguirus. I like the fact that him and Godzilla are biffles. I didn't like how she was used in King of the Monsters. I think King of the Monsters is such a fucking train wreck. She has no personality in King of the Monsters, and no, I have major problems with that. I don't really want to get into that here. In fact, I don't really want to talk about King of the Monsters at all. But I'll just say that King of the Monsters is another example, another Hollywood movie where I liked it on initial viewing, or the first few initial viewings, and the more you think about it and the more I think about it, the less and less and less I like it. It's got Star Wars written all over it. Well, Varan didn't do very well. Varan the Unbelievable wasn't a very successful movie at all. It didn't. I mean, it made its money back, but it was, you know. And I'm not talking about the quality of the movie. Quality of the movie aside, I'm talking monetarily, because that's how Toho thinks. That's how any company thinks. They think in dollars. And I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm just saying that's how Toho thinks. And that's why they went with Mothra and King Ghidorah in GMK. And the fact that people are still butthurt over the fact that Anguirus and Varan got robbed and that destroys their enjoyment of the movie, I think is sad and pathetic. There, I said it. I think those people are just too much of crybabies, and that they can't enjoy the movie on their own. And there's too many of them, and I think that's just sad. Again, and I severely apologize to anyone listening who feels that way, but my respect for the Godzilla community as a whole is not very large. I kind of, yeah, I don't have much respect for the Godzilla community at all. Just because I think the Godzilla community is far too. The biggest problem with any community is that they're far too fan service-y, and I'm like, no. Fan service gets in the way of making a good movie. Fan service gets in the way of originality and creativity. If you're going to do it like in Shin Godzilla, where it's a music cue. You know, that sort of stuff. That's what you want to do with fan service in a Godzilla film, or a name the same way. For example, the main character in the Godzilla Saga, Glenn Adams, is a combination of Nick Adams, the actor, and his character Glenn from Invasion of Astro Monster. To me, that's fan service. That's the type of fan service I can get on board with, because it's a nice little Easter egg. there is an audience for Godzilla vs. Gamera. However, it's very niche. A lot of people don't know who Gamera is, which is one reason why I love the fact that Arrow... My ass is getting flat. One reason why I love Arrow for getting into it and doing what they're doing with their release, which I'm fully on board with, fully in love with what they're doing. I love Arrow anyways. But yeah, that's one of the big reasons why I am completely on board with that. I can't fathom either, because Toho distributed the Gamera movies, and there was a big possibility for them to happen. However, I think the timing was wrong. Because in the Showa series, Toho and Daiei were die-hard competitors. Toho ultimately won, because Daiei went out of business. And then Daiei sort of reformed, but had Toho distribute their movies. And by that time, Godzilla had already run out of steam. You know, Godzilla, they had already announced Godzilla vs. Destroyer. Godzilla was going to die. They can't just suddenly revamp him a year later. And also, at the time, America was making their own Godzilla movie. And so that's one reason why they decided to kill Godzilla off, was to make way for the American Godzilla. And look how well that turned out. But they didn't know that at the time. And so the timing was all wrong in that case. And then, of course, Kadokawa Pictures came in and bought the rights to Gamera full sale. And now they're competitors again. And also, Gamera the Brave didn't do very well at the box office. Oh, yeah. If Kong... First off, they don't have the balls to do that, though, Justin. Kong... Here's what's going to happen in Godzilla vs. Kong. And you're going to fight me. You can't fight me on this, because this is exactly what they're going to do. Godzilla and Kong are going to roughhouse for a little bit. And then another monster is going to come in that's going to be even worse than those two. They're going to team up. They're both going to fight, and there's not going to be a real victor. There's only going to be a loser, and that's that third monster. Godzilla and Kong are just going to go about their merry way. That's exactly what's going to happen in Godzilla vs. Kong. You can't convince me otherwise unless they do completely do something out of it. That's because nobody in Hollywood has balls anymore. They don't want to piss anyone off or make people think about their movies. Hollywood is nothing but a pedophilic cesspool. One reason why I'm glad I'm based in New York. But not that New York's much better, but at least it's clear from Hollywood trash. And yeah, I'm a little cynical about that. I'm sorry. And is it going to be Mechagodzilla? Nothing like that has been confirmed, and I like how they're being quiet about that. I'm actually okay with how quiet they're going to be. I would actually be okay if they made their own monster. Who am I kidding? Who am I kidding? Yeah, no giant octopus devouring them both at the end. No, unfortunately. We did a pause. Yeah, keep playing. Come on. So I'm listening to music in the YouTube playlist. Doesn't want to keep playing. An original idea for a Godzilla film is to have the plot involving scientists attempting to inject G cells into human subjects, in which fail, which they succeed in cloning a human with Godzilla genes. Isn't that Frankenstein Conquers the World? And I'm not saying that to be mean, Martin, but isn't the idea of Frankenstein was that boy ate a bit of Frankenstein's heart after Hiroshima? Or did that... It doesn't make much sense. I still get confused over that, because for a while there I thought that Frankenstein's heart grew into the boy, but then somebody told me, no, he ate Frankenstein's heart, and that sort of turned him into Frankenstein. But whatever. In my Atragon manga, there are 3 OCs named Henry Morse, Russ Stewart, and Paul Tamblyn, and I am totally on board with those names, by the way. Can you guess who their names are references to? Well, no, I can't. That's sarcasm, by the way. I approve of those names. I like doing things like that. I think that's fun. Peter Jackson likes doing that too. For example, his remake to King Kong is just full of little shit like that, little Easter eggs. And to me, if you're going to do fan service, that's how you do it. Is you do it how Peter Jackson did it in not only Lord of the Rings, the original trilogy, but also King Kong. The Easter eggs in that were absolutely wonderful, and they were never distracting either. Never were they, in my humble opinion, were they distracting. So I'm gonna wrap this this live stream up at around 11:15. So if there's any questions that you guys have about the Godzilla Saga, now would be a good time to ask, and I will answer them to the best of my personal ability. God, Frankenstein Conquers the World is such a clusterfuck of a movie. So many interesting ideas completely wasted within the first 15 minutes of that movie. Because the first 15 minutes of Frankenstein Conquers the World are really good, in my humble opinion. Let's see. It's a shame we've only got to see 3 mecha versions of kaiju. Godzilla, Ghidorah, and Kong. I'd like to see more versions of Mecha Kaiju. Do you have any new mecha in your saga? No, I do not. I don't. I have Mecha Godzilla. Mecha Godzilla isn't even really a mech. I won't get into too much of what's going on with him because it's such a huge spoiler in the stories. But the only mech that I do have in this is Mecha Godzilla. And why Mechagodzilla is made the way he is also discussed as well. And so on and so forth. God, my voice is killing me. I've talked for two hours straight. I'm really not used to that. I'm used to also having a guest on with me. Gaston. It's Beauty and the Beast reference. Oh, I hate myself now. But, yeah. Satsuma claims that Koichi Kawakita was working on a Mecha Mothra for G versus Mothra. He said that. It's never been confirmed, though, Justin, so I don't really know. There's a lot of shit that man had in his idea. I never knew that he was an alcoholic. Koichi Kawakita was an alcoholic, and he went through a bit of rehab before he returned to Godzilla versus King Ghidorah. I didn't know that. Respect to that man. Massive respect. I know I poo-poo over his visual style quite a bit in my Heisei podcasts that I've done, but I do gotta respect that man. I really do. And I think his mentality was always in the right place, too. In the very least, his mentality was in the right place. Mad respect to him for that. Why would Mecha Mothra... I want you to explain to me right now how Mecha Mothra would make sense. How? I can't think of a scenario where I would want a Mecha Mothra. At that point, I'd just make a jet. Some sort of super powerful jet like the SY-3. The SY-3 is actually the _1 ship that I want to see make a comeback, and that's why I didn't make the Katango or Atragon the ship within my series for G-Force. I made it the SY-3 because I just love the SY-3 to death. I adore the SY-3. I love its design. I love its name. I love everything about it. Making sense is not the point! Well, yeah, in his audio commentary, because Koichi Kawakita and Shinji Higuchi were the two guys in the audio commentary for the Mysterians, yeah, Koichi Kawakita blatantly says that the Mysterians is not just one of his favorite movies, or not only was he a big fan of it, it is his favorite movie of all time, and it totally shows. Totally shows. It does, actually. I can see that because they have the pointed snout and the way how they're sort of shaped and everything like that. Yeah, I can totally see that, Justin. dropped something. Sorry, I'm just checking a few things. Because I'm about to wrap this up, everybody. All right, everybody, I'm going to wrap this up. I want to thank you all very much for tuning into this. Thank you all very much for participating. I had fun chatting about this. Sorry if I come off as being arrogant. I'm really trying not to. That's one of the reasons why I like having guests on the show, is because I don't like talking about myself too much, because I'm just kind of a Joe Schmo from nowhere, from Bumblefuck, New Hampshire. What right do I have to say about anything? You know, that's sort of the deal. But thank you all for watching. If you haven't already, like the Godzilla Saga on Facebook. You just type in the Godzilla Saga, it'll be one of the first things to pop up. If not, go to AN Productions and you'll see links to it there and everything like that, or on my website at AdamNProductions.com. Yes, that's right, we have an official website. That's awesome. But yeah, see you all later. See y'alls later. See you in the next live video. More podcasts are coming up. Definitely some more live videos are coming up. Some highlight reels are also coming up from previous gaming live streams that we've done as well. No frugal filmmakings, just because we haven't been shooting anything because of COVID, and quite frankly, the way how COVID's going right now, it looks like we're going to have to push that back even more. So I have no idea what's going on with that, but more stuff is coming to ANP. More stuff is coming. So, well, until the next video, everyone, take care. Have a good night. Stay safe, and definitely stay healthy.